Honourable Brian Walker. Dr Brian Walker.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. I regret to say that I was absent on urgent parliamentary business yesterday, so I've been reading through yesterday's Hansard to see if any of my questions would have been superfluous, and indeed many of them are. I really wanted to verify in my mind that we can receive a commitment from the government that the overall intent is to provide a body which gives good advice to the government on which the Minister can then work. And to that end, it would have been, of course, advisable to have as wide a body of consultation as possible. And I would like to hear from yourself a verification that as much consultation as wide as possible was in fact given.
Parliamentary Secretary.
Yep. Thank you, Chair. And remember, there was, as referred to yesterday, a very broad consultation in terms of the bill, of developing the bill. We believe that consultation could not have gone further, and agree with your assessment that the wider the source of expertise on the board, the better.
The Honourable Dr Brian Walker.
Thank you, Parliamentary Secretary. It was with some degree of surprise, therefore, that I found that there was a large degree of concern from the environmental bodies that they felt themselves to be unfairly heard or inappropriately consulted with. Now, of course, impressions can vary, points of view can be very strongly felt, and of course an opinion can be held without much merit based on facts. But is it fair to say that the overall feedback that we on this side have received is that the bodies most associated with environmental protection, involved on a daily basis as a passion in their lives, that the majority of those have felt their advice has been ignored?
Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Chair. Member, look, we can't comment or speculate on how organisations felt about the process, but there was, as outlined yesterday to your crossbench colleagues, there was two processes here. There was the Vogel-McFerrin review, and I believe, my understanding of the line of questioning yesterday, that that's perhaps where the most aggrievement was felt during that process. When we were formulating the bill, there was a series of workshops held on the 17th of June, 16th of July. There were briefing sessions. In terms of what we're here to debate today, which is the development of the bill, we feel that there's been adequate consultation, and we certainly have done our best to engage stakeholders in that environmental space, because obviously they're important in the formulation of the bill. Yeah.
The Honourable Dr Brian Walker.
Thank you, Parliamentary Deputy Chair. Parliamentary Secretary, I failed to have found in my research I did there, ranging widely, I yet have to find one single concern from industry bodies that their views were not adequately heard.
Parliamentary Secretary.
I'm not familiar with how industry feels. I'm not familiar how each individual stakeholder feels. All we can do is consult widely, take everyone's views on board, formulate a bill that we think everyone will be happy with.
The Honourable Dr Brian Walker.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Precisely, Parliamentary Secretary, because you see, the independent mind would take a view that looking at all the information would be very helpful, would it not? And in the work that I have done to examine closely the precedents for this bill's construction, it has become clear to me, and indeed to other impartial observers, that advice on the one hand seems to have not been well received, and advice from the other side seems to have been completely received, resulting in a bill which, to the open mind, might then give rise to the conclusion that the Environmental Protection Agency had to some degree been defanged, and that the interests of the industrialists are more adequately represented than those who are concerned with the environment. And it would be reasonable to expect that we should be able to examine if this is a fair opinion or not. I'm sure you'd agree with that. So the question then is, why were the consultations with regard to this kept Cabinet in confidence and not available to those with an open mind to examine?
Parliamentary Secretary.
Thanks, Chair. So, look, Member, I did cover this extensively yesterday, and I don't intend to take too many more questions on this line of subject. There's a lot to get through. But there are two processes here. You're clearly referring, by the Cabinet in confidence, of the Vogel-McFerrin review. That was commissioned by Treasury. I went through this yesterday. It's not something that we're able to comment on. The review is cabinet in confidence. The recommendations have been made public, the 37 recommendations. 5 of those recommendations are the basis of this bill. And once we got those 5 recommendations, we engaged with the stakeholders and held the briefings and workshops that I discussed before with the list of stakeholders that I read out yesterday.
The Honourable Dr Brian Walker.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Precisely, Parliamentary Secretary, and that was indeed the intent of my questions, to outline for posterity that this is actually an irreconcilable feature of this current bill, which has unanimous, I think, opposition from those who are concerned with the environment and unanimous support from those who don't particularly care for the environment but do care for their shareholders' profits. And this is something which will, I anticipate, be looked at in the future with some degree of concern. So I'm not expecting a reply to that polemical statement of mine, but I'd like that to have been documented and be there for, well, time immemorial.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. Member, look, I don't quite agree with the premise of what you're saying. The Minister for Environment and me as Parliamentary Secretary are concerned about our environment. This bill doesn't change the environmental approvals process. This changes efficiencies, administration, timeliness for stakeholders and applicants. Now, they may include property developers and mining industries, you point out, but I think there's a growing number of renewable energy projects that would also like to see more efficiency in the approvals process. So I don't accept that just because you support the bill, you don't support the environment. That's very much not the case. We think that we've got the balance right here to have a more efficient system that remains the integrity of the environmental approvals process.
Now, let's take another part you mentioned there about the competing demands where the environment is part of the consideration. And it seems that the government is saying, well, there's other things which need to be taken into account, and therefore we're going to broaden the range of skills on the board to allow for a broader view, if you like. I'm going to give you a real example of the conflicts. I first went out to work in Hong Kong to be a medical officer for the construction of Chek Lap Kok Airport. Now, the airport was created by flattening an island, a small island, off a large island, Lantau Island, and there was landfill there, and they built an excellent airport, second only to Changi, I believe, and renowned airports in the world. The one problem was, when I was there initially, there was a small hill, which is still there, by the way, and on that island was of a unique frog. And that frog lived only on that island in the entire world. And flattening the island and involving heavy machinery was putting that frog's existence in jeopardy. So the balancing needs were to preserve the environment or to build a major airport, as the Kai Tak airport was no longer fit for purpose, being built in the middle of Hong Kong and being a dangerous place to land in. So the competing interests resulted in the loss to the environment and the loss to our world of a species of frog. Now, you might think that's no big deal, but the principle is there, that the economic and social interests outweighed the benefits of that particular ecological factor, which would imply that, based on the definitions you have given us, that were the competing factors such that the dollar bottom line in a struggling economy would overrule the needs of the economy, and on those definitions you have supplied, the economy would come second best.
Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Chair. Member, so to take your example, purely an environmental consideration would be made, should there be such a case here, by the EPA. They would make an environmental assessment. Then the consideration of any factors other than the environmental is up to the Minister upon deciding on the EPA's recommendation. This is reflected, among other things, in the fact that the Minister's decision-making power under Section 45 of the EP Act is not constrained by express statutory criteria.
Dr Brian Walker.
Thank you, Parliamentary Secretary. Does that explain in clear terms why we've lost 70% of our vegetation?
Parliamentary Secretary.
I'm unable to comment on that in the context of the bill.
If I can go on with more practical examples, we heard yesterday, finally, from the media, reports again about Alcoa and its clearing of Jarrah forests for mining of bauxite. And that probably, I haven't got the actual information in front of me, but I would assume the Environmental Protection Agency had already given approval for that. because Alcoa gave assurances that they would rectify the damage caused, and so the money earned by the industry and, of course, the shareholders would be used to make our state richer, and the end effects after they finished their mining would be return to the nature of before. That's the environmental protection. But then we find that, as against all the reassurances, that the evidence is that there is irrevocable damage to the Jarrah forests, and with that, of course, to the flora and fauna of the Jarrah forests, meaning an irrevocable damage to a precious environment in Western Australia, which already happened under the watch of the previous EPA, but now with the somewhat relaxed instructions of allowing people like myself to be giving advice to the minister, who can then choose to take the advice or not, and who can then make a statement saying it is our intention as an environmental agency to make money first and the Jarrah forest comes second. That would be a ministerial statement of intent, certainly over the last decades, if not in the future. And so the question is, in what way would the newly forming Environmental Protection Agency alter the decisions made in the past?
Parliamentary Secretary.
It's a difficult question to answer. Thanks, Chair. Member, difficult question to answer because all Alcoa projects are currently under assessment and I can't comment on projects that are under assessment.